Before we get into today's episode, I want to touch on a major development in the romance scam world recently. Investigators are calling the case a romance scam on steroids. It ended with 3 deaths and 1 near death. Here's a brief description from FBI Special Agent in Charge, Spencer Evans, on the case against Aurora Phelps.
The charges being unsealed today relate to crimes Phelps is alleged to have committed against 4 male victims. We believe Phelps connected with each of them through an online dating application so she could lure them into her confidence under false pretenses and then drug them with dangerous doses of prescription sedatives or other controlled substances. Once she incapacitated her victims, Phelps stole their cars, accessed their bank and brokerage accounts to withdraw cash, used their credit cards to make a variety of purchases, including luxury retail goods and gold, and even attempted to access their Social Security and retirement accounts. We believe Phelps kidnapped one of these victims by heavily sedating him and pushing him across the U.S.-Mexico border in a wheelchair due to his inebriated state. Phelps then took him to a hotel room in Mexico City, where the victim was found dead a few hours later.
Phelps was living in Las Vegas, but had dual citizenship in Mexico as well. And Agent Evans says one of the 4 victims awoke from a coma after Phelps gave him prescription sedatives over the course of about a week. According to the indictment, she also allegedly accessed a victim's trade account and sold Apple stock worth about $3.3 million, though she was unable to withdraw that money. So several of victims' relatives called authorities when they were unable to contact their loved ones. The FBI believes there could be more victims out there, and they're hoping more people will come forward. The FBI is also working with the Department of Justice and Mexican authorities to secure her extradition. Now, Phelps faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. We can expect to hear a lot more on this case in the coming months and years. I suspect podcasters and documentary companies will all want a piece of this story. I put a link to contact the FBI if you're a family member listening to this podcast. You can find it in the comment section on this post on the Scammer Stories Facebook page. Now, on today's episode of Scammer Stories, I've worked really hard to help spread the message about scams by hosting this podcast, but there are people like Tracey who are doing most of the work. Tracey's a volunteer who happens to be disabled, so when she's not spending time with family, her dog, or taking care of her health, she has time to really dedicate to the cause, staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning many nights, speaking with victims and their families and volunteering on projects like Operation Shamrock. She knows way more than me on the ins and the outs of these scams and has built relationships, even with law enforcement where she lives in the UK. So all of that to say, she really knows her stuff. You'll get the idea here in a minute. Like I asked you before, how did you get involved in this whole mess, in this whole world?
It was quite a few years ago now. The kids were sort of saying to me, it's about time you met somebody. I've been single for a long time. Sort of, why don't you try online dating? Because obviously I don't get out much because obviously I'm disabled. So I'm not really able to meet people as such. So I thought, yeah, give it a go. I'll just subscribe for 6 months. So that's what I did. And I literally only spoke to one person and I thought, he seems quite nice. He said he was an architect and he said that he lived in Trafford in Manchester. So, yeah, we carried on talking and we went off Match and onto WhatsApp. At this current time, there was nothing about romance fraud in the papers or on the TV. I'd never really heard of it, to be honest. I heard about scams and scammers and things, but not actually romance fraud.
Yeah, same here. I hadn't either.
It was just weird, really. It's really random. But yeah, he was fine. We chatted like most days. Obviously, he was saying, I'm going out to Turkey and I'm building a mall. And he actually sent me the plans, the architect plans of this mall that he was supposedly building in Turkey. And I thought, oh, well, this is pretty impressive, Told me all about himself. Obviously, I told him about myself. He was supposedly out in Turkey, and he started to say that he was struggling and he was having difficulty with this project because he couldn't get his equipment over there because of the import charges. And, people were sort of on his back saying, he needed to get this done. Anyway, then he asked me if I could invest in his business. I didn't have that kind of spare money anyway to invest in anybody's business, and I wasn't going to do that. So I just said, well, no. And then obviously he came back with, well, does any of your family or any of your friends have the funds to invest in my business? And I never even asked them. I just went, well, no. I said, nobody will be interested. And then we just carried on talking, but obviously he kept mentioning this, that he was having these difficulties. And, I was just sort of being a little bit sympathetic, thinking, oh, it's a shame. And then out of the blue, I got a phone call from him one day. I was actually at my dad's, and I took it out into the garden, and I was talking to him, and I thought, oh, your voice sounds weird, your accent. I didn't say anything to him, but I actually felt quite intimidated when he was talking to me, and he was saying, oh, I'm coming back, I'm coming home, I've got flight tickets, and I'm coming to the airport near you. And I was thinking, oh my God, like alarm bells. It was quite a scary thought, really. And I said, all right. He said, yeah. And he actually sent me the tickets to show me that he booked this flight. I wasn't aware that you could get the edited tickets and find all these things on the internet, and it looked pretty genuine. So I was like, yeah, okay. And he said, well, can you meet me at the airport? And I said, well, yeah, I suppose I could do. But in my mind, I was thinking, no, I'm not doing this, And I don't know, I just felt really intimidated by him. So when we got off the phone, I sat outside and I was thinking to myself, I don't know, there's just something not right here. So I started asking him a few questions, just random questions. And I said to him, well, whereabouts in Trafford do you live? And he came up with this place. And straight away I knew that he was lying, because obviously a long time ago I used to do some booking permits for a charity. So I knew the areas pretty well. And when he mentioned this area, I was thinking, that's nowhere near Manchester, it's like up the other end of the country. So I never said anything to him. And I was just like, all right, okay. And then I happened to go on to Instagram, and I've not really been on Instagram before. I didn't really know much about the platform, and I thought, oh, well, I'll give it a go. The kids are on it. And I was scrolling through, and I thought, oh, what are these profiles? And then I realised that these were, anti-scam groups, because obviously they were talking about these fake profiles. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to have a look. So I went through the page and I was scrolling through, and I was sat in the kitchen with my dad, actually, and I was like, oh, my God. This is him. And my dad says, what do you mean? I said, this is him, look. And as I went through the different profiles, there was hundreds of profiles all using the same picture.
So it turned out that Tracey's scammer was using a picture that's used a lot. The man is actually gay. Still, that doesn't even convince some victims.
It was just surreal, really. And I was thinking to myself, this is really weird, but it's a little bit kind of scary. And I was thinking, oh, God, he's got my phone number. And then I sort of went back to him and said, you're not who you say you are, because obviously I found this picture. He didn't deny it, but basically I just kind of blocked him after that.
Well, what happened the day of the airport?
I think I just messaged him and said to him, the only people that will be meeting you at the airport will be the police, because it certainly won't be me. I blocked him, but I did get a couple of calls from a very, very similar number.
Tracey got random texts as well, and the provider was the same. When she looked up the provider, it was actually from Turkey, which is where my mother's scammer lived. I still believe to this day.
And obviously, there are a lot of scammers in Turkey. But yeah, I mean, he didn't bother me after that, because obviously I blocked him anyway. And I'd already said to him that I know that you're fake, and I'd sort of reamed off the questions that I'd said to him, and he'd given me all the wrong answers.
They're doing this all day long, every day. That's how they get so good at it.
Yeah. But the thing is as well, they can get remote access quite easy. They can get remote access to your device quite easy. They've only got to send you some kind of an email, some kind of a message, with some sort of link that's, put in with the message. And if you've clicked on that link, they've got remote access to your device.
Now that Tracey's would-be scam is over, she's delving into learning about the big picture and talking to other victims.
Actually had a lady recently, a victim in the US, and she was a widow. She'd lost her husband in May, and 6 weeks later, she'd met this guy on a widower's site on Facebook. And obviously, he's done all the nice stuff. He's sat up all night with her, talking to her, because obviously she's very vulnerable and grieving. So she'd formed this relationship with him over about 7 months or something like that, 7 or 8 months. And obviously he'd taken her off the platform and onto WhatsApp, and he was calling her every day and sitting up all night with her, talking and comforting her, offering his support. And she'd formed this attachment with him. And then obviously he then started asking her for money, and she paid the money. She literally drew out large cash sums from the bank. She literally deposited the funds into an ATM, a Bitcoin ATM. She just kept drawing these large amounts out. I managed to speak to her daughter, because it was her daughter that got in touch with me originally. And I reached out to the victim because obviously the daughter and the mother are slightly estranged because of this situation.
Mm-hmm. Been there?
Yeah. So they weren't actually talking. So I reached out to Mum, and I managed to get a conversation with her. We had a good conversation, probably, I sat up till probably 3 o'clock in the morning. And we had a 3-hour conversation on the phone. Obviously, she was really, really upset. She had some idea that maybe he wasn't who he said he was. And obviously, I'd showed her who he was, the guy that he was using anyway. The actual surgeon he was using was a facial surgeon, plastic surgery, somebody in the US. She said, obviously, to me that she was going to report it and sort it out and not send you any more money. But as of yet, we seem to think that the relationship's still going on. And after a few days, she actually blocked my contact. And the worst of it was, after we'd spoken on WhatsApp, he actually phoned me. Yes, that's what he'd said, obviously in his own language, but that's what he'd said to me. And he actually thought I was another scammer trying to get in on the scam. So he obviously convinced her that I was fake, even though I'd shown her all this evidence and told her to check me out. And I'd spoken to her at length. But she told me that she had trouble with her computer, so he offered to help her. And I think she gave him her login, basically got remote access to her devices. So he could actually see the conversation that we were having when we were texting. So, yeah, pretty scary, really.
I get so frustrated and heartbroken every time someone reaches out to me and wants to know how to get their parent to stop.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say. It's really rare to get them to stop. Just like you said, you stayed up with her till 3 o'clock in the morning and couldn't convince her.
Yeah, and I spoke to her, for a few days after that. She said that she was going to therapy, and I thought, oh, that's really great. She said that she told her therapist all about this guy. And I said to her, well, have you told your therapist that you've sent him money? And she said, oh, no, I've not said that. And I said, well, you really need to come clean, and you need to tell your therapist everything, because I'm sure, they can support you and help you through this if they know the truth. And she was saying to me, oh, it's fine, I'll sort it. I don't need any help. I know what I need to do. I'll pay off my debts and things. Because she'd got a property that she was going to sort out in Florida and actually sell. And obviously that's been my worry. The fact is that she's actually out there at the moment at this property, getting it ready. Obviously the only thing that I said that I could do is reach out to law enforcement in that area and just see whether they could perhaps go around and do a welfare check.
I want to go back a little bit. When you figured out that you were talking to a scammer, some people would just block the scammer, move on with life, and try not to think about it ever again. But you decided to become an advocate. Tell me that process and tell me what you're doing now.
Well, I think it was because, like I said, I just thought there's lots of these people, and obviously lots of people are getting scammed. And, I was reading more and more and more about it on Instagram. And then I started helping out a couple of anti-scam groups. Obviously, I found a way of finding out which accounts were fake. And obviously, I was finding loads and reporting loads, and they were actually getting closed at the time. They were really good at closing them. And then, obviously, I left that group, had some kind of an altercation. I don't know, the woman was a little bit funny. So I left the group, and then I decided to set up my own, because I thought, well, I can do this. And then, obviously, with somebody else's guidance who also had an anti-scam at the time. She was absolutely brilliant. She told me and showed me how to do a reverse image search. She taught me quite a lot of things, really. And then she lost her account because scammers managed to get her account closed down. Well, she didn't come back. That was the thing. I was really surprised, and I did feel really bad for her, because I just thought, this woman's been on here for quite a number of years now, and the work that she was doing. I mean, she told me that that her husband was a solicitor. She was French, I believe. Because obviously then she would tell me, the process of how hard it was to actually convict somebody, when you know that they're a scammer. So she was telling me lots of things and showing me lots of things. And then she literally just disappeared, and I hadn't got any other contact with her other than on Instagram, so I couldn't even get in touch with her. So I just decided to set up on my own, and like I said, I was pretty good at finding the accounts and getting them closed as well. So that's kind of what I did. And then obviously people started messaging me, saying, have you been scammed? Were you a victim? I'm a victim. So then I, obviously started to help other people. It just kind of spiraled from there, because I just felt like this is what I needed to do. I just got this feeling that I needed to help people, and this was exactly what I wanted to do. Plus, it kept me sane as well, being at home most of the time. People would say to me, oh, I don't know why you bother. I don't know why you're doing that. People try to put me off. And I'm like, no, this is helping people, and this is what I want to do. So I kind of expanded from that, and I set up on Facebook, and then Twitter, and then I started on TikTok, and then I think I lost one of my Instagram accounts, so I had to set up again, and then I did a backup account, because I thought, well, if it goes again, at least I've got a backup.
Tracey is talking about the advocating pages on social media that get shut down because scammers report them, and Facebook or Insta remove them, and they have to start all over again.
And then obviously my Facebook is a group. I set up a group. There's not many of us in the group. There's only 200 and something in there. But at the end of the day, we've been going, how long have I had that? 3 years? Getting on for 4 years. And we've not had one scammer in the group at all, because I'm very stringent when it comes to letting people in. I literally check their social media. I check their friends lists. I check everything that I can check. And obviously, if they're okay and they're not following lots of fakes and things, then obviously they can join the group. But I just wanted to create that safe space where people could come and ask questions and look at the fakes that we post and the information that gets posted, and not be harassed by scammers all the time. And obviously it's worked. So everybody is quite happy in the group, because you tend to find that a lot of the larger groups are full of scammers, absolutely full of them.
Well, and if you look up on Facebook, if you look up anti-scam groups, a lot of the actual pages are scammer.
Yeah, I've done a few exposes on them actually, on my reels, various groups and things. I've highlighted them because, there's some of them have got like 50, 60, 70,000 followers, and the majority of them are fakes.
And some of these groups, some of these advocating groups, there's a lot of drama, and I question their integrity. That's why I joined advocating against romance scammers, because that group is amazing.
Exactly. That's another thing. You will get that. Unfortunately, there are one or two anti-scam groups that do sort of. It does get you down a little bit, because at the end of the day, we're all there to do the same job, and we're all there to try and help people. most of the groups, obviously, that I have dealings with, I mean, we all help each other.
Yes.
You know, I do talk to Ruth from Scammer Haters, and she'll help me with things sometimes. You know, she was the one that helped me sort of get into Meta when I needed to send my fakes to Meta to get them closed. You know, she went to Meta and asked them if they were able to send me a link, and they sent me a link. So obviously I can bulk report. So, you know, Ruth's always been very, very helpful to me. And then obviously you've got Anna. She's great, and we're really good friends anyway. And we've helped each other out for the last few years as well. And then obviously Kathy. And that's sort of my main group, if you know what I mean, you know, where we all collaborate and talk about different things. Because I've been doing it now for, it's 8 years now.
So, Anna, you've heard on this podcast, and I'll post a link in the show notes. Kathy is the president of the board that I'm on, and I'll post that in the show notes as well.
Obviously, now I've made a lot of contacts on LinkedIn and through various other places, and you know, I can offer people resources and tell them where to go and who to reach out to, and try and help any way I can, really.
And in the UK, you guys have taken the romance scams world a little bit more seriously over there. We're behind over here in the US. I mean, here in the US, police departments are just now figuring out that it's a crime. District attorneys still aren't filing charges against people who are in the US because they think these women gave away their money and there is no crime.
I've heard that, actually. I've heard that recently. Someone, it was Beth. It was Beth that said, wasn't it?
So Beth, you've heard on this podcast too.
Beth, she put on the other day that she got all that evidence, but obviously all it needed was law enforcement to get involved, but they won't get involved because they're basically saying that it wasn't a scam.
Yep.
It's awful, isn't it? I mean, I know it's highlighted more now over here, but it's only been a recent thing, really. I mean, they're only just getting into, like, posting more things in the media, doing more articles about it, you know, doing the odd interview about it. It's very slow. And some of the law enforcement over here are not trained in romance fraud, don't know how to talk to victims or anything. You know, I think things are steadily changing, and I think they are getting more educated as to how to treat victims and things. But I know some people have been treated appalling, you know, by the police when they've been a victim of romance fraud, even here. You know, and they come to you and they're all upset and they're going, well, you know, they won't do anything about it. They don't want to know. You know, I've had 1 or 2 victims like that. So they are slowly rolling out things, but it is very slowly.
So I asked Tracey, since she hears from more victims than I do, what's the trend? Is she seeing more pig butchering or straight romance scams or what?
Yeah, I would say sextortion.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I have so many victims of sextortion. It is unbelievable. The thing is, it can transpire from, you can start like with a romance scam. And, you know, obviously you're talking to a guy, you think you're in some kind of an online romance with them. You know, you're going to share pictures with them. It doesn't always have to be intimate images either. You know, as we know, and I've highlighted in my reels, we've got all the Nudify apps now, all the AI manipulated technology.
Yes, that's terrifying.
So, you know, you can just send them a fully clothed photo and they can just literally take your clothes off. And what I've found is, obviously, when I've been researching and going through the Telegram groups, I actually follow a lot of groups on there, and they share all their stuff. And there are pictures, loads of images on there that they're actually selling to people, you know, that they have manipulated, where they've got images of victims, and then obviously they've undressed them and made them into pornographic content, and then they're selling them on Telegram. The thing is with romance fraud, it can go so many ways. We were talking about this the other day, and I said, you know, romance fraud isn't always just romance fraud, because it can just transition into something completely different. Because if they, you know, if you're not getting scammed by them romantically, but then you've sent images to them, and intimate ones sometimes as well, like I said, When they realise that they're not going to get any money out of you that way, that's when it then transitions into sextortion, because they've then got these images. And by which time, a lot of the time, they'll screenshot all your followers and your friends and your family if they can do that. And then obviously they'll threaten you with these nude images or intimate images and say that they're gonna send them to all your family and all your friends if you don't pay a certain amount of money. And I'm seeing this absolutely loads. But then it can also transition the opposite way, because obviously with pig butchering, it can be a romance scam, but then it transitions into a pig butchering scam because then crypto's involved.
When I was listening to an expert the other day about these sextortion scams, and he said the good news is there's AI and the bad news is there's AI. And that means in a sextortion scam, if they're going to send pictures of you to your family, just say, oh, it was AI, block them and move on, shut it down. But these victims are getting so wrapped up in this that they're thinking about suicide and all kinds of things.
Yeah. But funnily enough, I don't know where I read it, but I read something actually the other day, and somebody had done something on sextortion, and I think it might have been on TikTok. It might have been somebody had posted something about sextortion, because obviously you can't hashtag sextortion now on TikTok because they'll remove it. And if you actually put a reel up or a post up about sextortion, a lot of the time they'll take it down. I've had quite a few removed when I've tried to, sort of warn people about sextortion. You kind of not have to mention the word. What I actually read was they were saying you shouldn't block them and you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. And I'm thinking to myself, on what planet are you? Because that is the one thing that they need to do, is literally stop all contact and block them. Because what I've explained to the victims I've had recently, because I've had a lady and she's been talking to me today, and I've just said to her, you're not talking to this person still, are you? And she said, no, I've definitely blocked him. And I said, well, if you've blocked him on all channels, through WhatsApp, email, on whatever platforms, that he's on, I said, then he can't threaten you if he can't contact you. And the majority of victims I've had have been fine. After blocking the contact, they've not actually heard from the scammer again. Occasionally, they will come back with a new profile and they'll try and message them pretending to be somebody else. And then they'll start the whole thing all over again, threatening them again, saying, oh, it's me, why did you block me? I want this money, or I'm going to post these images. I did actually have one victim from the US last week, and she'd actually sent intimate images to this guy that she'd been talking to, and he'd been trying to extort money out of her, and he'd managed to get her friends list, and he'd actually sent them to one of her exes. So he had actually done that. Now, he'd not sent them to her husband because she was married, but he'd sent them to her ex. And then obviously her ex had sent them to her. So obviously she was quite scared, quite worried about it. And I just said to her, obviously after talking to her at length, I just said, well, you've literally got to block him everywhere. I said, and if this continues and he's still trying to contact you, I said, then it might be that you're going to have to change your phone number. I said, change your email address. And if you have to, change your phone number. I said, because obviously, he has got a friends list, he has got a family's names, but the majority of the time, I would say maybe 95% of them don't go through with the threats. It's just a threat to make people pay up.
Tracey talked about her TikTok videos. Now, the same day as our interview, she spent 5 hours doing a live TikTok, and it was packed full of information for victims and their families. She's planning a lot more, and yours truly might be there soon. I'll post all of the links to find Tracey in the show notes. If you need more from her, send me an email at scammerstoriespodcast@gmail.com, and I'll be sure you get in touch. And as we're speaking, I'm getting ready to go watch a story that Beth and I did with NBC News, and I will have to update you on how that went at a later date.